So another thing you can do with your Gemini machine is you can use your standard stencils to do dry embossing through this. Now to do your dry embossing, we're going to use, of course, the embossing mat. And I'm going to bring in here just some pearlescent cardstock. And what happens is we use the dry embossing mat and it forces the fibres of the cardstock up into the spaces we've got in the stencil. Now, depending on how deep you want that emboss to be, depends then on what shims you add in. So remember, we've got a plastic shim, a magnetic shim and a metal shim. The metal shim is not so appropriate for this, but depending on the depth of the emboss, depends on which shim you use. So I'm going to start off by doing a very, very deep emboss. Actually, we'll start off by using a lighter one and then I can show you the difference. So if we use just the magnetic shim, then you use your rubber embossing mat, then your material and then your stencil. And this is going to be a light emboss. So we'll pop this here and offer this into the machine. Now, you can see there, as that came through the machine, we had some slight movement in our embossing mat, and that is not uncommon when we use a very, very thick sandwich because of the nature of the embossing mat. Because it's a super thick embossing mat, it's very, very squidgy. Now, if I show you what that looks like, so this is how we get a nice subtle emboss. This is if we've just used one of the thinner shims, which was the magnetic shim. Now I'll pop that to one side. And I'll bring another piece of card and do exactly the same, but this time switch out the magnetic shim and we're going to add in the much thicker shim, which is your plastic shim. So exactly the same combination again. We use our cardstock and then we use the stencil and we're going to offer this now into the machine. So, if we lift that out, I want you to be able to see the difference. So you can see there the difference in the two types of the embossing. So it's just about the different shim that you use and how deep of an embossed finish you get. Now, when you're doing your stenciling, you can also ink through your stencil just like we ink through our dies. So I've got another stencil here. And it's just a beautiful pattern of some lovely flowers there. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to do just a thinner stencil because we don't need to have a lot of, we don't need to have a very thick emboss if we're going to put some ink in there as well. So I'm going to replace back out and put my slightly thinner shim in. And I'm going to position this right at the bottom because remember, one of the benefits of this machine is we can auto reverse if we're not using a full positioning piece. So I'm going to offer it in and stop it when it's part way through. So that is giving me the stencil. Now I just bring in a piece of the scrap card again, bring back my ink pad and the cut and dry foam. All we do is pick up a little bit of ink onto the cut and dry foam and then hold that stencil in place and we can just stencil through. So we'll get the embossed detail and also the colour on the stencil. Now you could use a repositionable adhesive to hold your stencil in place while you're working through it, and it's just going to make this stage a little bit easier. But just so you can see the effect there. that is a lovely finish we can get. And remember, that has been embossed, so when I turn that over, you can see the very slight embossed detail that we've got there. But the little bit of colour just gives it that little bit something extra.